All right. It's Tuesday morning, about 10:22. People ask me frequently, what websites do I go to get my news? Three primary ones: the Bulwark, great articles, great writing, great podcasts. The Atlantic, great writing. It's more commentary than like actual news, but extremely thoughtful analysis of the day's events. And the third is a site called Talking Points Memo, run by a guy named Josh Marshall. I've been a subscriber to that page for 20 years. He's got a good write-up this morning. It's titled Trump Sparks Constitutional Crisis, Seizing Budget Authority from Congress. And that's what Trump tried to do with this memo last night, written by the acting director for Office of Management and Budget. I think it was actually written by the incoming director, Russell Vought, who wrote Chapter 2 of Project 2025 on executive power and his desire to greatly expand executive power in the vein of white Christian nationalism. Josh Marshall notes that already the halt to U.S. aid budgets has cut off funding for the prison guards holding 9,500 ISIS prisoners in northeastern Syria. Cancer research, major parts of every state's budget, the grants that keep local daycare centers running. This action hits basically everything. The best way to understand this is that it is essentially a unilateral government shutdown on steroids. Even government shutdowns distinguish between essential and non-essential government activities. This action does not, though it does not appear to affect the salaries of government workers. If this goes into effect, it will show up more or less immediately everywhere across the country. It is also blatantly unconstitutional and violates the Impoundment Control Act of 1974. I talked about that earlier in a TikTok a few minutes ago. A law intended to prevent much more targeted versions of this, which had been attempted by President Richard Nixon. In practice, it amounts to the executive branch illegally seizing spending authority from Congress, as determined in Article 1 in the Constitution. This action will trigger a host of lawsuits and will rapidly make its way to the U.S. Supreme Court. So he makes a couple of other observations. First, this is fundamentally a battle over public opinion. Yes, this is patently unconstitutional. Presidents have discretion over spending decisions, but only at the margins. The sheer breadth of this order makes this clear-cut. It also violates the Impoundment Act of 1974, but as we know, laws and constitutions are not self-enforcing. That goes to the point that I made earlier. It's like, okay, so the Supreme Court issues an order to Donald Trump that says you're not permitted to do this. Is he going to obey that order? Or is he going to look at the Supreme Court and say, okay, like Andrew Jackson, the Chief Justice has made his decision, now let him enforce it. Our judiciary branch does not have an enforcement arm. That's why we have the executive branch. When the executive branch is completely willing to ignore the law in the Constitution, that is why people are now calling this and describing this current circumstance as a constitutional crisis. But will the public accept this? Will the Supreme Court go along with this? This isn't a conversation about norms or aid to a country you've never heard of. It will show up all over the place pretty much immediately. Federal funding for cancer research, full stop. Federal funding for bird flu research and prevention, halted. We just had to kill 20 million birds nationwide because of the spread of bird flu. And it's already in humans all across the country. There's like 70 cases right now. Various federal grants that fund parts of local and state governments, basically everywhere. States and localities are already having, I think it's been reported by ABC News, they're having difficulty accessing funding right now. And it hasn't even been 24 hours. And this order allegedly is not going into effect until 5 p.m. today. There are multiple state attorneys general who are preparing to file a lawsuit later on today. I'm assuming seeking an emergency injunction against this. And, We'll keep an eye on that. But this is a fucking shit show, man. It's it is an unconstitutional, illegal power grab on Donald Trump's part, and I still firmly believe that he's doing things like this because he wants massive protests in the streets nationwide so that he can use the Insurrection Act to impose martial law and assume dictatorial powers over the entire United States. That's his endgame.